There's not a clear-cut answer. Do I support the movement to economic reform, delicensing, started in the middle 1980s?
Yeah.
So do I support the general movement in favor of economic liberalization?
Yeah.
My general answer is yes, because when you control and don't allow the market forces to work, quite often, and this used to be true in the case of the license permit Raj, is that those licenses and permits used to go to only some monopoly houses.
Yeah.
So why is that good? Now we have opportunities opened up for a lot of other people. And I think this, in a sense, has coincided with a social phenomenon in India, which is often not commented upon. It's always 91 reform, etc. It is also in this period, through democracy, gradually the lower castes and in general the weaker sections of the population, some of them, not all of them, some of them have been able to come up. And they are being able to take the new opportunities. I'll give you examples, particularly in South India and Western India. Peasant castes, which are not the really lowest, but in the middle, they became gradually more, certainly economically more prosperous, but in generally socially more assertive. So, and they have been, to give the example of Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu, you may have heard about this in Coimbatore, this garment industry that's come up in Coimbatore. Who are the main entrepreneurs? Particularly from a caste group called Gounder. Who were they? They were earlier in the agriculture, they are peasant castes. So they did well in agriculture, got some money, and they invested the money in this. These are not Tatas and Birlas and Ambanis. These are people coming up, some of them are now quite rich. So I'm just saying, along with economic liberalization, this coincided with a period in which some limited amount of social transformation, largely because of our democracy. So these new entrepreneurial people have been able to take opportunities opened up by the liberalization. And that, I think, is an aspect which one should not, even for Dalits, sort of people are talking about, there are not now a lot more Dalit entrepreneurs, but one should not exaggerate it. Yes, there are some Dalit entrepreneurs, but it's more this middle caste, the peasant caste, you see a lot more coming up and taking new opportunities. So in general, my answer is yes. But does it mean I'm wholeheartedly in favor of liberalization? No, unless some corrective measures are taken. Everybody would recognize all over the world that when you open up market, just as opportunities open up for people, in general, the market reform benefits are unequally distributed. So yes, I gave you some examples of lower groups coming up, but in general, inequality has been increasing all over the world, including in India. So market reforms have to be accompanied by things to do, corrective measures to correct those things about inequality. And that is not enough, has not been enough. And that's where the Congress-BJP issue comes up. Because I think in the UPA first 2004 to 2009 period, there was some attempt in response to these problems of inequality, some efforts were taken to improve welfare, in which the National Advisory Council that Sonia Gandhi had some effect. Not I think one should not, BJP tends to exaggerate their effect. So for example, I'll just give you an example. The NREGA, which is the Rural Employment Guarantee, came in that period. pushed by the National Advisory Council. But NREGA's history goes back. Even before the UPA regime, if you think about the Aruna Rai's movement in Rajasthan, it's been going on for decades before 2004 UPA regime. So there's a history to it. But UPA regime, the first one, did take up these issues. NREGA was passed. Before that, a very important measure was the right to information. That made a big difference, and that also grew out of a movement which was there earlier. So it's not that suddenly UPA took those policies. Issues were there already, but those came to some ways of correcting the effects of inequality. Similarly, I would say Tribal Rights Act, Land Rights Act, and so on, which Forest Rights Act, and then in the UPA 2, in response to the lot of agitation about the land acquisition. Again, with the development, a lot of land was being acquired, not enough compensation, a lot of people were uprooted. Quite often is the Adivasis who got uprooted more quite often. So in that sense, the Forest Rights Act, which by the way is not yet very well implemented, those play a role, and these I would put as, in a way, in reaction to the forces of inequality generated by the market reforms. Now, so that's, you might say, those are positive aspects of the UPA regime, but there are negative aspects of UPA regime too. But let me go on to that. What about the BJP? Has BJP taken different policies? I think BJP's difference is more in rhetoric than actuality, because BJP has not got rid of the things that I just mentioned. Even though they were very much opposed to NREGA, now it's ironical that BJP is now taking credit for NREGA. So that's good. Instead of, even Modi came out with a lot of things about NREGA, we'll keep it as a what is it? As a monument to the failure of the Congress. And now he wants, his ministers are claiming credit for NREGA. But that doesn't mean that everything is fine with NREGA. There's still a lot of wastage, a lot of corruption in NREGA. Also, the government is not helping matters by, in many cases I understand that wage payments have not been made for many months. And this is very serious, not merely because it's causing hardship to the poor. See, the whole idea of NREGA is that if I, as a landless worker, demand work, the government guarantees work. Now, if I find that when I work, I'm not paid for 6 months, the next time I will not demand work. And the government says, you see, there is no demand. So in a sense, there's a self-fulfilling aspect to it. In any case, it is not true that wherever work was demanded, they were provided. There's a lot of unmet wants in NREGA. So there are a lot of problems with NREGA, but even with all that, I would say NREGA has been a major positive step in India. Similarly, the other thing the UPA regime did, which BJP has not discontinued, is the Food Security Act, which now, about in the rural areas, 75%, it reaches 75% of people. In fact, people have not commented on this. In West Bengal, I find Mamata Banerjee, one of the platforms on which she won is 2 rupees kilo rice. That was very popular. What Mamata never mentioned, and I'm surprised opposition didn't mention much either, this is part of the central government. It's the National Food Security Act. Mamata expanded on it a little bit, but is largely an impact of the National Food Security Act. Same thing is true, National Food Security Act. BJP governments have actually encouraged it in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. So they have done a good job with UPA policy. So it's not that they have. So in general, I would say on many of these welfare measures which UPA took, BJP, whatever the rhetoric, has more or less continued with it, with some, as I said, wage payments, etc. With some qualifications, they have done this. So I would not say that there's a big difference. One difference which I would say, again, it's a continuation. BJP, Mr. Modi particularly, in the 2014 election, said that we have to have a new approach. The UPA approach was doles, giving doles. So all these policies that we're talking about are as doles. We are going to create jobs, and so that is a different approach. First of all, he has not created jobs, and I don't think by 2019 job situation is going to change very much. Not that many jobs will be created. The other day in one interview, Mr. Modi has said, yes, jobs are being created, but they're yet invisible. Well, people
point of an invisible job.
Right. Secondly, we have a whole statistical machinery. Very soon they should be captured in the statistics. We don't see that. In fact, the Labor Bureau now collects job data for 8 industries, 8 relatively labor-intensive industries. And if you look at them, it's, if anything, it's getting worse. So, where are Mr. Modi's invisible jobs? It should show up in statistics sometime. So I don't expect that this new approach of creating jobs, if it works, fine. But I'm pessimistic on that account. And this is according to my expectation, because I think it was a hoax when BJP government, BJP before coming to power, gave the impression that we are going to create jobs. Look at the Gujarat model. Gujarat model is not a model of creating jobs. Gujarat is a state where the economic growth rate was high, but not necessarily job creation. Economic growth rate was high because Mr. Modi as Chief Minister gave a lot of capital subsidies to these large companies, Ambani's, Adani's, SR. And where are they? They are primarily in capital-intensive industries like petrochemicals, petroleum refineries, etc. And if you disaggregate Gujarat's growth, it's in those sectors a large part of the growth was. So Gujarat is a model of high growth, but not of high jobs. These two have been mixed up in the election campaign in 2014. That in Gujarat we have created jobs. Now for Bihar, UP we are going to create jobs. That's a hoax. So I don't expect that many jobs to be created. But going back to doles, just now I told you that Mr. Modi's model, Gujarat model, was based on capital subsidies. What is that? That dole to the capitalists. Right? So if you look at data, how much of our subsidies go to the better off people, not just capitalists, middle class also, the better off people. That's a very substantial part. In fact, there are some estimates which show about total subsidies that the government gives both in the center and the states, 2/3 go to the better off. So I regard that as dole to better off. So why do you object to dole to the poor when you are giving a very much larger amount? If you count 2/3 of the total subsidies, that's much larger than our total anti-poverty programs. So dole to the rich and middle class, much larger than dole to the poor. So Mr. Modi or anybody has no ground to stand on when they talk about dole to the poor. Employment generation is a very difficult subject. Employment is not that easy to generate. That's why I'm pessimistic. Yes, there are many things, some things that can be done in the long run. So for example, I'll just give you examples. Suppose you are a small producer. You have a little, majority of producers in India are in the informal sector. So you have a little shop, little household enterprise. So what are your main problems? Main problems are quite often electricity. So suppose you have a small shop which, let me give you a concrete example. Suppose you do garments, which is highly labor intensive, creates lots of jobs. At the moment you employ, say, 5-6 people, informal household enterprise. Now you are thinking of expanding to hire 50 people. Okay. Now you will hear quite often in India it's said jobs are not being created because of labor laws. Because in India the labor laws tell you that if you hire more than 100 people, then if you want to sack somebody, you need government permission. So that restricts hiring. But let me go back to this concrete example. This guy who was hiring 5-6 people now is thinking of expanding to 50. Labor law is not a problem, because labor law kicks in only when you have 100, right? So when I'm thinking of expanding to hire 50 people, a little larger size of, what are my constraints? Electricity is a major one, because at the moment the only use of electricity, I probably have a little light bulb. There, maybe the tailoring machines will be and other kinds of power equipments, etc. So I have to then worry about, do I have regular supply of electricity? Even if I have regular supply of electricity, do the voltage fluctuates? Because voltage fluctuates, these machines are going to burn out. So those issues to me are concrete issues. So what we do about electricity is very important. To be fair to Mr. Modi, he has done a good job about electricity in Gujarat. But now that he's Prime Minister of India, he has to do it the rest of India. I have not seen much signs of that. Electricity reform, to me, is a very important part of reform, which neither UPA nor the current administration done much about. Electricity is a major input for people to expand jobs. Similarly, roads, because roads improve connectivity, etc. To some extent, roads are happening. I understand that one of the areas in which this government has done reasonably well is in building roads. I hope that continues, but that is a positive part of it. So electricity, roads, those are extremely important for creating more jobs, much more important in my judgment than labor laws. If labor laws are reformed, I have nothing against it, but I don't think that is the major constraint. That is one among 20 constraints, but labor reform, people give too much emphasis on labor reform. The other thing that I would suggest for employment generation, which I don't find people suggesting that, in India there are large, I already told you, Gujarat they were doing it, but in rest of India too, they give a lot of capital subsidies. In order to encourage investment, you give subsidies to capitalists. So essentially, come with your capital, you will get a subsidy, you will get a tax holiday, or you will get a special economic zone, etc. These are all parts of capital subsidies. When you subsidize capital, it is not a surprise that people use capital intensive technology. Not many jobs are created. You use a lot of capital because that's where the subsidy is. So that immediately suggests to me an opposite policy, wage subsidy. Why don't you start a policy which says to the capitalist, I'm not saying a socialist, to the capitalist, if you create more jobs, instead of introducing automation, machines, etc., if you create more, for each person you hire, the wage that you have to pay, government will subsidize part of it. In West Bengal, I see this all the time. In fact, if you now in West Bengal, if you get a car and drive around the state, you'll be stopped in many places. Young people will come and stop your car and says you have to pay money. They will of course tell you this puja, that puja, etc. But it's just, they don't have jobs. So essentially, they are collecting their form of taxes, right? This will happen more and more. In West Bengal now, if in large parts of West Bengal, if you want to build your building, you have to buy materials from these particular young people who will charge a much higher price and much inferior material, but otherwise the gundas will come and not allow you to build. So where are these people coming from? Because they don't have jobs, so these are the semi-criminal occupations in which they are coming. If I think of UP, Bihar, this is going to become a big problem over time. However much they promise of jobs, if the jobs don't come, which I don't expect to, this will be a big social problem. So I think policy attention should be given to what are the different concrete ways jobs are done. I'm not that enthusiastic as the current government is about the smart cities program. If there are no other constraints, yeah, it's okay. But it seems to me the most of the emphasis in the smart cities program is on digitization, on IT, etc. Whereas most of our cities are not livable at the moment. Make it livable for the majority of people. That is the real smartness. Digitization is not the real smartness. Yes, we call smartphone, we call it smart city, but that is not going to affect the lives of the majority of people. Make the cities livable. Only then call them smart cities. So I'm not that enthusiastic of the current visualization of smart cities. Make in India, I'm not even sure what it means. If Make in India means so something should be produced in India, not elsewhere. That goes back to the old protection regime. So if that is the case, I'm not sure I'm in favor of it. But in general, if you want to encourage manufacturing, I'm all for it. There are many constraints. I've already mentioned some kind of constraints. You need, for Make in India, you need tremendous amount of electricity reform as one of the things. You also need a great deal of private investment and public investment. At the moment there is a big stagnation going on in private investment because of the bank debt problem. Many of these defaulters, willful defaulters, which were not paying back these huge loans, so the banks are in trouble. And they don't want to, so therefore the banks don't want to lend out to them. So there is a debt overhang and stagnation in the field of private investment in India now. So that means all the more public investment has to go up. Now, the problem of public investment then would be two kinds of problems. One is, where is the money going to come from? Now, I would not be against even increasing fiscal deficit to spend money on public investment. But there, the government has a problem. The earlier UPA government had the problem, the current government is a problem. They're worried that if the deficit increases, what will the international credit rating agencies? They will lower our grading. Now, what is the cost of lowering grading? You will not get foreign investment. But foreign investment is not coming to these fields which will create the jobs. So I think I worry less about foreign. Yes, fine, if foreign investment comes, it's fine. I'm generally in favor of foreign investment, but not at the expense of public investment. So that's one problem. The other problem is, for quite some time, we have followed the mode of public-private partnership. So some part private, some that did not work. In fact, in many cases there have been corruption in public. So there, that whole regime of public-private partnership have to be rethought, have to be made transparent and less corruption-prone. There is a tendency, whenever one thinks about reforming the public-private partnership, that when the business is doing well, private people make money. When it's not, it's on the public sector. The banks, they will not return loans to banks. So the public sector. So this is a peculiar thing. Privatize the profit and socialize the losses. That's not the way to run. So I think the public-private partnership, which otherwise I'm in favor of, because government does not have enough money, has to be rethought of and reorganized. It's really sad that Raghuram Rajan, who is such a brilliant person and such a wise person, India has a rare opportunity to have such a central bank, and not many countries have this opportunity, and we have wasted this opportunity. Now, having the RSS attack dogs attacking him, and Mr. Modi remaining silent, and Mr. Modi opening his mouth only after Mr. Rajan resigned. This is scandalous in my judgment. Independent of the central bank independence question, we have a rare opportunity to have this brilliant person whom the whole world respects. He happens to be a personal friend. For disclosure, I should say that. But this is a wasted opportunity. There are very few such brilliant people that Mr. Modi can ever hope to get. Having said that, on the central bank independence, I'm in general in favor of central bank independence, subject not to day-to-day scrutiny, but periodic scrutiny. So the policies, say every 3 years, every 5 years, should be discussed in public, in parliament, everywhere. But not day-to-day interference. So I'm in favor of central bank independence from day-to-day interference. And I also find that the current way of doing, very soon, I suppose next month, the new governor will be appointed, and Mr. Modi and Jaitley will get together and appoint somebody. This is not the way to. This appointment process has to be much more publicly decided. This has nothing to do with the candidates, because I find the short list that I saw is reasonable people. I'm talking about the general in principle. Should be much more public debate on the issues. But once you appoint, don't interfere. And Rajan, in fact, has recently come out with a statement that the governor's tenure should be at least 5 years, not 3 years. I think that's a correct statement. It should be 5 years. But as I said, every third year, the Parliament and in public debate, we should have a discussion of the previous 3-year Reserve Bank's policies. I think in the case of Rajan, something else may have worked. We don't know, but I'd be surprised if it's not happened. Mr. Rajan was not very popular with all these willful defaulters of the bank loans, right? And many of these are crony capitalists, right? And I'm sure from behind the scene, they must have put pressure because Mr. Rajan has come out with very strong words against them. He called them freeloaders, essentially. Taxpayers' money that they have taken and willful defaulting. So I think behind that, it's not just RSS pressure, but also these tycoons and crony capitalists must have been quite uncomfortable with the stringent policy that Rajan was taking. But in any case, going back to something that I mentioned before, there's too much focus on monetary policy. I think there should be much more fiscal policy. You are bound, you say, what would international credit rating agencies say? So all the focus is on monetary policy. I think it should be much more balanced, both fiscal and monetary policy.